And so I started, consulting. I found a way that I could help people through what I already knew in business. And that's been like a great journey for me through my consulting group. But I also started helping people through my podcast and having conversations every week and, a little 10-minute real talk with Roman. And so when you ask, where am I going? I'm hoping for those things to continue to grow, for me to continue to grow as an individual, because that directly correlates to my consulting, to my podcast, to my parenting, to all of that. So, where I'm going is on a road of growth. And I hope that I take as many people with me as I can.
Today we get to speak with Roman Roberts. He's a former foster child who grew up in various homes throughout Texas. At 18, Roman joined the Army, where he became an interrogator, deployed multiple times, and had the honor of supporting special operations groups from around the world. Roman transitioned from the military after an exciting and honorable career, but had traumas from the foster care and the military that he had not fully addressed. These traumas led to various issues that almost cost Roman his marriage and his life. After realizing that this is not what he wanted to become, Roman began the process of discovering his identity through journaling, religion, and having honest communication with himself and those around him. Roman now helps businesses be elite in their interactions inside and outside of their companies by assisting in communication, business strategy, process management, and more. Let's listen into this conversation as we discover more about Roman. Thank you for tuning in to Hacks and Hobbies with your host, Junaid. We're visited by our amazing guests coming from all walks of life who want to learn their story, their struggles, and their journey on how they got to where they are today. So stick around. Hey Roman, thanks so much for coming on to the podcast.
I'm pumped, man. I cannot wait to do this.
Fantastic. So Roman, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started, where you're going, and let's get the show rolling.
Yeah. So I mean, I love that question because like, where are you going, right? Like not a lot of people ask that question. So I love that. But I grew up in foster care. I like to say I grew up in some less than ideal homes. I had some great homes and some abusive homes. I wanted community. I wanted family. I wanted belonging. So I jumped into the military as quick as I could and jumped into interrogation, became a military interrogator, did that for 8 years, 6 years active duty, then 2 years as a contractor. And it was just a wild ride. I got to work with special operations. I got to see some of the best and the greatest in the world at the job. And, it taught me so much, but I had trauma on top of trauma. So I came home and transitioned and didn't really know who I wanted to be, what my identity was, because I was constantly being what people wanted. Yeah. And so that drove me to, down some pretty dark paths, almost committed suicide, stepped out of my marriage. Like it was a really bad time. We ended up working through it. And, I found myself, my identity, and my identity is in helping people. And I enjoy that. And I want that to be a part of me no matter what I do. I want to pass it on to my son as well. And so I started, consulting. I found a way that I could help people through what I already knew in business. And that's been like a great journey for me through my consulting group. But I also started helping people through my podcast and having conversations every week and, a little 10-minute real talk with Roman. And so when you ask, where am I going? I'm hoping for those things to continue to grow, for me to continue to grow as an individual, because that directly correlates to my consulting, to my podcast, to my parenting, to all of that. So, where I'm going is on a road of growth. And I hope that I take as many people with me as I can.
That's fantastic. Helping others is something that I've also alluded to, not just alluded to, but find a lot of joy in, because you're able to show people what's possible. Because a lot of times you have, like for example, they say I have a writer's block, I can't write, or having a creative block, or it's just that you are so overwhelmed that you create a block for yourself. So having an outsider's perspective and being told that, hey, it's possible and this is how you do it. Let's walk you through it. it's such a pleasure to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing for me, like from foster care, right? A lot of people kind of count foster kids out, right? The statistics are, they'll move 7 times in 2 years. We know that moving is traumatic on foster kids. Then you add into that majority of them are 50% more likely to end up in prison, on drugs, things like that. And then you add in that the rate for a degree is usually about 1% of what actually graduates from high school,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then you get into like masters and things like that. Numbers get even smaller. So for me, yeah, man, those self-limiting beliefs, they just kill me when people think that or when they hear other people saying that. I mean, we've really got to change the conversation around all of that to be, I believe in whatever it is you believe, right? Like there's enough space for everybody, like you're a
Yeah.
podcaster, I'm a podcaster, like there's space for everybody, and you're not going to be everyone's cup of tea. But hell, when you break down the math, there's what, 4 million people in the US alone. So if you're just a US person, which I'm in Texas, right? So when you do that, like if 1% of the world gets value from me, or I can help 1%, that's still like 4 million people, or like, yeah, 4 million people. Like the number's crazy. So when you really
Yeah.
break down the math, and then you get even smaller, like niches and stuff like that, like
Mm-hmm.
there's space for everybody, and there's people that need to hear your story, your voice. And I think for me, that was one of the biggest things. Like I did when I was going through my healing journey, I was kind of afraid to tell my story.
Yeah.
And I didn't really want to. And then I was on Heather Parody's podcast, first podcast I'd ever been on. And she, at the end of it, was like, "You have an amazing story. You should tell your story. Have you ever thought of doing a podcast?" And, I just kind of laughed it off. But, I'm so glad I listened to her. I'm so glad, I didn't let those limiting beliefs stop me, or, the
Mm-hmm.
fact that people saying, "Hey, you're a foster kid, like that, you're not going to achieve as much, or you can't do as much," right? Because had I done that, or hey, you're a guy who cheated on your wife, or hey, you're a person who almost committed suicide, right? Like if I
Mm-hmm.
believe any of those individual things, like that's it, that's game over, I'm done.
Right.
But if I say
Exactly.
those are all chapters, those are all things that I did, mistakes or lessons that I learned from, then that pushes me to the next chapter. And then I can say, hey, for you out there who's having trouble communicating for your wife, for you out there who's having trouble communicating in your business, for you out there who
Mm-hmm.
thinks it's all falling apart because you can't communicate with yourself, like, let me tell you what I did, and let me tell you what I went through. Like I may not be the only person, or I'm not writing the book on how to, well, I guess I am writing a book on communication, but I'm not the only person doing that. So, but
Exactly. There's
hopefully
a
I can
ton of.
resonate with someone who needs that, and they can hear it in a way that resonates for them.
No, you're absolutely right. See, we're all in this world, and we occupy a space, which means that we belong, right? So just thinking that we don't belong is a falsehood in itself.
Yeah.
How can you be like, hey, there's nobody in the mirror while you're standing in front of the mirror? You can't, right?
Exactly.
You're right there.
And
So I love it. I love it, man. That's really, really nice way to put it. So tell us, so you already told us your version of your journey, but what's some of the stories that you haven't told yet?
yeah, that's, it's funny because I was actually talking about this the other day, because I've been doing podcasts and being a guest on different people's show, and your story kind of becomes the same as you do it. And
Mm-hmm.
you kind of tell the same type of things. And so again, like another super interesting question, right? Because a lot of the time I get driven towards communication or to talk about foster care. And, I think the story that I don't really tell as much is my relationship, right? Like about
Mm,
me and my wife. And it's all interconnected, right? Like to say that one piece exists without the other would be totally false, right? Because
exactly.
where my relationship has gotten to would not have happened had I not had the traumas that I went through in foster care, or had I not even been in foster care, right? Like if you can take it back another level, the actions wouldn't have happened to get me on the path to even meet my wife, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so like, and you can call it fate, you can call it divine intervention, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but there are certain things that you, as bad as it sounds, you have zero control over. And I think that's the
Exactly.
biggest thing, is people have to realize, like, I can control these things and there are other things I can't. And one of the critical places for that is a relationship, right? Because for me, I started my marriage living under this belief of happy wife, happy life. And it's just not true. Like the better phrase, and I was actually on a podcast the other day and we were talking about it, and her phrase is happy spouse, happy house. And that's a little more true because it's both spouses collectively focusing on their happiness that then creates a happy home, right? Like home is where the heart is, home is where your family, like all those different home and happiness quotes that we hear, they exist because people were living in homes that were existing inside of happiness, that there was a certain feeling of love, right? Like why during the Christmas time can you equate certain feelings of whether it's happiness or sadness based on whatever your personal experience is, right? You smell apple cider and you think of grandma, right? Or whatever it is. It's because somebody took the time to work inside of that relationship. And for me, doing communication and doing all these different things, it's funny because, you know, people will say, oh, you must be so great at communicating. And yes, I know all the tricks, I know all the tips, but there's still times in my relationship where my wife is like, yeah, you know all this stuff, but you're not communicating with me right now. Or, hey, like, what are you doing? You're getting frustrated, you know, and you're not saying anything. What's happening, right?
Yeah.
Because we all revert back to those people that we were, or those easy, quote unquote, easy habits that we know or that we have. And so for me, you know, I don't talk a lot about my relationship, not because I don't want to, just because it doesn't ever really come up outside of kind of glancing through into the other topics. And I think outside of communication, I think really and truly relationships are important, whether it's with your spouse or with your friends or whoever it is, and it ties into communication, but we have to truly evaluate our relationships. You know, I saw this thing on Instagram today, and it was this uncle, you know, giving this guy grief who's coming in to date his niece for like the first time kind of thing. And, you know, I looked at that and I thought about it for a little bit and I was like, man, you know, whether it was a niece or a nephew, I'm going to do that to the girl that my nephews bring home. Now, maybe not as aggressive or anything like that, but I think for all of us, we're trying to build empires. We're trying to build legacies to some degree, whatever that is, right? Whatever it is for you, whether it's $1 million or large family or whatever it is, you're building some form of legacy. And in doing that, like you have to realize, like it wasn't just, you know, a guy that built an empire. Guys and girls have built empires for millennia, right? Like it's been a collective. And so I think we need more accountability inside of our relationships to say, hey, these are good people that I'm bringing into my tribe, bringing into my family, bringing into my life. And hey, these are toxic people. I need to pull them out, whether it's your family or your friends or whoever it is. And I think that's hard for people. It's a hard pill to swallow because, you know, well, this has been my friend since high school. Well, have you gotten where you wanted to be since high school? You know, like, are they getting you there or are they holding you back? Is the person you're with helping you achieve those goals or hurting it, you know? And I think that's something that we all need to think about. And I had to think about that in my relationship and realize, like, was I stepping out of my marriage and being a bad person because my wife was a bad person? Or was I in a bad place, right? And I was in a bad place. And it doesn't justify my actions. Like nothing will justify the actions that I did, but it allowed me to begin the journey of healing. And then it allowed her to begin her own journey of healing, which allowed her to address things in her life. And then both of us came together in a better, more healthy way. And I think we start these relationships and we say, we're going to take these two broken people and we're going to come together and we're going to build this amazing thing. And then we realize partway through, like, oh man, we got to fix like the foundation first, right? Like it's like you buy a crappy house and then you're like, but I'm going to make it into the Taj Mahal. Well, you can. It just takes time. It takes work. And that's the thing I found in my relationship. And that it stands true for business or anything else, right? Like nothing good is easy. And so it's kind of a topic I don't really talk about a lot, but I'm kind of glad I got to bring it up here.
No, that's really, you know, brave of you to talk about it because as people who are married, you know, it's not top of mind. It's something that everybody who's married is thinking about because guess what? You're living with another person. And the more you do, the more, you know, the more things you're going to figure out about them and the more things that's going to annoy you. So it's easy to, you know, ignore it, but then it creates a more special bond when you address those situations and say, hey, how can we work together to cover each other's faults? Because guess what? Not the reason the two people like come together is because they say opposites attract. So I'm going to be good in one thing and she's going to be good at another thing. So we complement each other. So it's a it makes that balance happen.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that because so prior to all this COVID stuff, we went through, our affair, and then we had we weren't supposed to be able to have a son, and then we had a son, and all of these different things, and then some bouts of unemployment, and all of this together. And truthfully, it made us kind of stronger for when we went into COVID. Like people were like, how come you guys aren't really freaking out? How come you guys aren't really this? And, religion's a part of it. Like we had our faith and all of that. But also we were just like, we've been through a lot worse together. We've been through other things together. And so we just kind of adapted to what we already knew because we had that foundation there. And I think that's any relationship, right? When you're building those foundations and putting those time in, I think of it like a bank, right? Like you don't put money in the bank for the good days. You put money in the bank for the bad days, right? Like, exactly. And so that's kind of the way a relationship is.
That's awesome. And so tell me some of the things that are keeping you motivated and moving forward. And you did mention that you want to keep growing, you want to keep helping and bringing people along with you. So what keeps you more motivated, like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. Ooh, I like that. That's good. So I have my own personal habits, right? Like my own daily ritual. I run, I eat a clove of garlic. It's super weird, right? But I do that for my health and because it tastes like super harsh. And so it like jolts me. And, I think that's kind of life, right? Like you have sweet and you have like sometimes you have to do some things that you don't like to do to get to the places you want to be. And I think it's kind of a little bit of a reminder for me in doing that. And obviously, my family is my biggest motivation. Like I'm doing this to build something for my son, for, his family and things like that. And that mindset. But truthfully, it's been a weird year for everyone, right? Like, and for me, I started like doing this podcast and I started collaborating with people and I started, meeting all these amazing people doing amazing things and jumping into things that I'd never jumped into before, getting booked into virtual conferences. And, I love to grill. So I connected with this lady and her name's Kelly Maxwell. She has a podcast, Campfire Hour. And, we did an episode together and her big thing is collaboration over competition. And she's making a coffee. And then she was like, hey, I kind of want to develop a coffee meat rub, but I don't really know much about it. You want to help me out? So I started developing a meat rub with her. Right. And so like in 2020, I developed like this meat rub, this coffee rub for meats. And it was super random, but like, that's what motivates me is getting to jump onto these crazy limbs and do these things that, wouldn't even be possible. And honestly, had I committed suicide that day, it would never even happen. Right. Yeah. And you think it's something small, right? Like, oh yeah. You made a meat rub. Like, what's the real impact of that? Well, have you ever sat down and grilled with your family? Well, that's the impact of it, right? Like you associate good times to grilling. If you ever do that, well, that could potentially be because that meat rub, right? Like, and that's an oversimplification or maybe like an over exaggeration of how great the meat rub is, but the general concept still stands. And I think to me, that's what it is. It's just chasing after these things, jumping into these new things and saying, hey, I don't know if I'm going to rock it, but I'm damn sure going to try and we're going to see what happens. And it's been just one roller coaster after another. And it's been kind of amazing. And I have like my own list of dream goals of places I want to be and things I want to achieve. Right. Yeah. But just, I won't say that I say yes to everything, but I definitely jump into some of the things that are completely outside of my wheelhouse. Like 2 years ago, I wouldn't have said yes to being on a podcast and I jumped on one with Heather Parody, right? A year ago, I would never thought that I've worked with somebody to create a meat rub, right? Like, and so that's what I hope. Like every year I have something that's like at least one thing that I'm like, yeah, I never would have thought I did that, but oh, hey, I just did that.
That's really awesome. What really shows me when you jump into something new like that, it creates that uncertainty into your mind and excitement and curiosity. It wakes up the engine in our mind that really gets our creative juices flowing and, pumping those endorphins and whatnot, because it creates that new kind of bond, right? You're creating a brand new bond. And like some of the best relationships that are built are with common interests, right? Common interests like watching a movie together, or consuming an entire era of Star Wars or Star Trek. It creates that bond between people. Like, oh, you can like totally relate, dude. Remember that episode 4? This happened. They're stuck in they're stuck in the trash can and whatnot.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that story, and you're immediately connected. You can immediately start talking, and those barriers that we put up on a daily basis when you're talking to somebody new come down, because hey, this guy knows what I'm about because I know what he's into.
Yep. Yep. I say it in conversation. And so when I talk conversation with people, I call it creating safe space, because there's really 3 pillars to conversation, right? Planning your conversation, creating safety in conversation, and reviewing your conversation, right? And I go a lot more in detail, but the cliff notes of it is definitely that, right? And in regards to the safety space, it's finding that commonality. And too often we say, well, I don't have anything in common with that person. Well, that's a cop out. Like, that's us being lazy. That's us saying, I don't want to put the work in to try to do it, because truthfully, that's what it is. Whether it's a conversation, a relationship, or whatever, like, they're not all easy, right? Like, you didn't find your spouse and just like, they just fell in your lap and said, you're the perfect person for me, and we're just going to do life together, right? Like, that for 99% of people, that didn't happen, right? Like, there's that one person who's like, she's been my best friend since we were born, or he's been my best friend. Like, okay, like, maybe not you, but for everyone else, you had to put some work in. So, and I hear it a lot with parents, right? Now that I'm a parent, I hear it a lot when people are like, oh yeah, I try to hang out with Bob, but he's just so boring. Like, I have nothing in common with Bob. And I'm like, well, what did you talk about with Bob? I was like, well, I asked him how his day was, and he said it was bad, and that was it. And I'm like, well, yeah, no wonder you have nothing in common with Bob. Like, maybe
because you didn't have a bad day.
Yeah, like, maybe you should try to find out, why did he have a bad day, or what does he do to decompress from a bad day, or whatever, right? And we find that when we create that safety, it changes things.
That's amazing. Why don't we go a little bit deeper into the 3 pillars, and so we can share with our audience what these are, and how they relate to, like, because I'm sure people have these thoughts in their minds, but they don't have a specific term for it. And then you being doing communication for so long, maybe you can give us a tip or 2.
Yeah, for sure. I love to. For me, like I said, I call it the 3 pillars, right? And the first piece is planning your conversation. And I love it because right out of the gate, people instantly are like, well, you can't plan every conversation. Like, what about when you go into Starbucks and you order a coffee? Like, you didn't plan for that conversation. Okay. Yes, I get it. You didn't plan to have that conversation in the sense of, this is not one of my large scale conversations, but you know what your desired intent is, right? Like, if you're going into Starbucks and, you want to be polite and friendly to the barista, then your approach and the way that you carry on that conversation should mimic that. But the key part of planning your conversation is knowing who you are as a communicator, right? It's starting with communicating with yourself. What type of communicator am I? How do I communicate? What are my big issues? Do I constantly look closed off? Do I try to be like, is this just my personality? And I need to make sure that I clarify that to people so they don't get the wrong assumption of me, right? Like, all those different things, they're all parts of it. But it only happens when you start planning your conversation, thinking, what am I trying to do in this conversation? What is my desired outcome? Because just like anything in life, there's a desired outcome. You don't do anything just for no reason, right? Well, and even if you're like, well, sometimes I sit down. Well, yeah, you sit down to relax. There's a desired outcome, right? So the same thing is true for conversation. If you're going into Starbucks, maybe it's the one that you're going to frequent, right? So you want to be on a good relationship with the barista so they know your order so you can move faster on a hectic day, right? But none of that happens if you don't take the time to say, what am I trying to achieve from this? And people go, well, that's manipulating people or using them. No, it's not. It's being realistic. We all have a desired outcome. Let's be realistic about it, because then that creates the next pillar, safety in the conversation, right? Because you can now approach that person and say authentically and honestly, this is what I'm trying to do. This is what my desired outcome is. How does this align? How can we be in alignment, right? And you can build that alignment. You can create it. And the other piece I always say with safety is you can always ramp up a conversation. It's very hard to ramp a conversation down. So unless and I also say this, unless you're in the military or the police or anything like that, there's very few instances where you're going into a conversation with the intent of taking safety away, right? Because safety in a
Mm,
conversation can be giving safety, providing it, making a person feel comfortable to talk, or
yeah.
taking it away, right? Making them feel like if they don't tell you what you need to know, that there's some form of danger or insecurity for them, right? For 99% of the people listening, you will never focus on taking safety away. You will always focus on creating safety in the conversation.
Absolutely.
And so it's really creating that environment, right? And it goes back to knowing the way that you communicate, but then allowing them that space to talk, right? Say, what do you want to talk about? What are your commonalities? And linking those into that conversation, right?
Mm,
Because if the person is into Star Wars, so perfect example, right? Like Star Wars and Star Trek, not really my thing, right? But I know
hmm.
the reference that you're talking about, and I can
Yeah.
understand the underlying point of, hey, this is a commonality, something that creates a bond. And for you, it might be Star Wars or Star Trek. For me, it might be Home Alone or, the League or Game of Thrones or whatever it
Mm,
is, right? So it doesn't mean that I have to like the same thing. I just have
right.
to understand the same core, right? Like I'm not a golf fan. I don't like it at all, right? But I understand that it's a sport. I understand that a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of intensity goes into it. I understand that there's a passion for the players, the same way as I'm passionate about baseball, right? So I can relate to it in that sense. And we have to stop
Yeah.
thinking about a conversation is only when I agree with somebody. Some of the best conversations happen when you don't agree with somebody, but you create a safe place where both of you can exchange those ideas. That's called learning.
Exactly.
That's called growth, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
and so when you create that and you give people the freedom and the safety to be vulnerable, to talk about whatever they want to talk about, to be open and to know that you're not going to look down on them, right? You're checking your body language so you're not like, oh, this doesn't interest me, or oh, I can't believe you're a Democrat, or oh, you're a Republican, right? Like
Hmm.
catching
Hmm.
yourself in those moments and not
Yeah.
being that
Yeah.
type of person. And then the third piece is reviewing it. Every conversation from the Starbucks barista to the CEO of the company, right? Like if you're having a conversation with them, you should probably be looking at it and going, did I achieve my desired outcome, right? If your goal was to be a dick and you accomplished that and the person felt off guard, then congratulations, you did what you wanted to do, right?
Hmm.
But if you did that and that's not what you meant to make them feel comfortable, or you wanted to learn one new thing about the person and you didn't learn anything, well, now why did you not? Was it
Hmm.
because you didn't give them a chance to answer? Was it because you dominated the conversation? Was it because you didn't make them feel comfortable to talk to you and they looked noticeably nervous the entire time? Right? Like
Yeah.
this is obviously condensed oversimplification, but truthfully, that's what it is. Just like in sports or anything else in business, it's create a plan, execute the plan, review the plan, right? Like nobody's really, and I think that's the other thing. Nobody's really dropping anything completely new. Like the world is not
No.
revolutionary. We're not creating new wheels or anything like that. Now there are new micro tips to the macro practices, right? But
Hmm.
at the end of the day, it's all the same. Plan,
It
execute,
is.
review. And I'm just saying it in a different way, but it's the same kind of thing, and it's something that most people don't do. The average person will have 30 10-minute conversations in the course of a day, not including social media interactions. So when you think about it like that, you're having a lot of conversations, but how many of those
Yeah.
conversations are truly effective? Like how many did you actually accomplish what you wanted to, right? And it can
Hmm.
be as simple as, you know, ordering your coffee. Like I said, did you order it and they got it right? They felt happy to be around you. You brightened somebody's day, right? Because a lot of people, that's what they say, especially now. Like, I want to make people feel better in these hard times. Well, did you do that? Did you actually effectively communicate that out to
Yeah.
somebody? And it sounds so simple, but once you start doing it in those little barista interactions, all of a sudden it starts reflecting in the way that you talk to
It
CEOs.
does.
It starts
Yeah.
reflecting in the way that you're talking to your potential clients. It starts reflecting in the way that you're talking to your husband or wife, right? And then
Yeah.
then it becomes addictive, like anything else, gamification, right? Now it becomes fun because I'm learning something, I'm seeing something, I'm growing, I'm reviewing myself, and I'm going, ooh, what if I did this? What happens then,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. Beautiful, man. I love it. Thank you so much, man. Plan, execute, review.
Always.
Three simple pillars of communication as told by Roman Roberts.
That's right. Be on the lookout for a book. There is a book coming. I'm working on a book on
Sweet, man.
effective
I'm super
communication.
excited for you. Writing a book is so much fun.
Oh, that was not the
And
word I thought you were going to go for there.
no, no, think about it, right? You're going through the journey. It's like, oh, I want this beautiful playground for my children, right? Took me 25 hours to build it, right?
Yeah.
I saw the booklets, had 50 steps. I went through step by step, created it. Took me 2 weeks, and I had to go through it to get to the final destination, the final product, the success product. And that's what it looks like for anything and everything. Like once the book is finalized and finished, you're like, man, that was a ton of fun. I got to do a lot of growth because, it's a ton of work. Like my friend of mine, he just finished writing how many 70 was it 70,000 100 some thousand words, and he's like, I'm going to do it in 30 days,
So
right?
that's
So
funny.
I'm like, holy smokes, how are you able to do that? So he forced himself to do it, but at the end of it, he's like, hey, I'm done. I can now hand it off to the editor, and then they can go and get it out there. But again, it's that journey. Like even Seth Godin says, the book that took him to write in 2 weeks versus the book that took him to write in 6 months, they're all it all comes down to what point was he trying to make in the two books. And I think the one that sold more was the one he finished in less amount of time because he was so much more focused, or he didn't have to do as much research. I don't know what it was, but it was a really interesting point that he made. So
Yeah.
thanks, Roman. This was a ton of fun. But before we move on, I do have a few questions before we ended this
I love it.
conversation. Awesome. What is the one hobby that you wish you got into?
I wish so. I wish I learned how to play the piano, but I would also say the violin, piano or violin. Basically, like you never hear anyone say like, "Hey, I learned how to play the piano," and that's a useless skill. Like no one's ever disappointed that they learned that. But then you got people who are like, "Well, I learned how to do this," and or like just random stuff like, "Oh, I play golf and I absolutely hate it," right? Or I hunt and that's too expensive of a hobby. But nobody's like, "Oh, I learned the piano and it's just taking it out of me."
Yeah. No, piano it's an amazing tool. It teaches you so much about mathematics and patterns and whatnot. And like I wish I had learned how to play at least one type of instrument, but
So I can
one
play an instrument. I can play the bass guitar because it's
oh
super
nice.
easy. It's like 4 chords, right? And
It
so like I
is.
can just play like the 4 chords. It's super
Boom,
easy.
boom, 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 boom.
Yeah, that's the
Right.
beginning and end of my musical talent right there.
I've actually played the bass. I tried to play the guitar, but I couldn't figure my figure out my fingers. I was
Yeah,
like, maybe I need a right-handed one because they're all left-handed, right?
yeah. And I'm left-handed, so you'd think I'd have like an advantage. Nope, not at all.
Nope. You just got to work that muscle.
Yeah.
All right, next one. What did you want to be when you were a child?
I always wanted to be in the military from the time that I was little. Just the brotherhood, the camaraderie, all of it just always appealed to me being a foster kid, right? So I always wanted that. And I got to do it. And I'm super glad
Yeah.
I did. I mean, I got to jump out of helicopters. I got to work with special operations. I got to see some of the coolest places and some of the worst places on the planet. But
Hmm.
yeah, it was everything I thought it would be. There were just a lot of things people didn't tell me.
Well, yes. Absolutely. All right, next one up. Next one up. What is your favorite movie or TV show?
Yeah, so this one was a hard one. See, my wife and I do some of these little things together. This one was a
Hmm.
hard one for me. Um, so we like any of those little crime gritty thrillers. We watch them together, right? And we're always up for recommendations. So anyone feel free to DM me with any recommendations. But we got super into Castle,
Hmm.
and like those kind of shows where they're solving a mystery, but there's like a little bit of like rom-com and just all of that rolled into one.
Yeah.
It's like those all-in-one shows. They're like a good little escape. They're funny, but you're like, oh my goodness, who did it? So that's kind of us.
So I'm gonna say Die Hard.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's yeah, definitely. That's always up there, and it's happening for the holiday season. But honestly, I think so. My holiday movie used to be Die Hard. I think it's gonna
Hmm.
have to switch to Home Alone because we watched it
Oh
with my
yes.
son last night, and my son laughed so hard. Like you'd have thought I'd given him the best gift ever by showing him Home Alone. And he just like the paint cans going down the stairs. Like he woke up in the
Hmm.
morning and he was like, "Let's put paint cans down the stairs." You know, like it's just so crazy.
What's cool is Zach King did a version of Home Alone on his YouTube channel too. So you check
Oh,
it
I'm
out
gonna
when you
have to
get a
check it
chance.
out.
Yeah. All right, next question. What movie would you choose if you got to play a character in it?
Ooh, ooh, that's a good one. I would want to pick a war movie, like maybe 13 hours or something.
Mm.
Some or even an older school war movie, like Saving Private Ryan or something. Just some kind of
Oh
movie
man,
where I
that's a
could,
classic.
yeah, where I could kind of be that, but also hopefully like I would do it justice, right? Because like as a veteran, you watch some of these war movies and you're like, what in the
Yeah.
world is that person doing, right? Like they've like flagged all their buddies or they've never reloaded a magazine, and you're like, what is
Hmm.
going on here? So I kind of hope that I could bring like a little bit of justice, but also portray those people so well because those were the kind of movies that
Nice.
motivated me when I was a kid.
Nice, dude. That's awesome. Now, have you had a chance to see 1917?
No, I haven't. It's on the
Oh
list for
my
me and my
God,
wife to
dude.
watch.
Oh my God. You gotta watch this movie on the weekend or whenever you can. It's
We plan
you know
to put this baby down for a night
yeah.
and fire up some popcorn and like so it's the holidays, right? So we have all the like little Debbie snack cakes. Like, don't judge me.
Nice.
I'm healthy. Like 10 months out of the year, November and December, it all kind of goes away, right?
Do
But
it. Do
but
it.
we like the little Christmas tree snacks and watch movies, and that's on our list of we need to watch this movie.
Nice. You're gonna love it, man. And be sure to let us know after you do see it,
Yes,
what you think
definitely.
of
I
it.
will definitely tell you what I think. We'll have to talk about it.
Awesome. All right, next question. Who is your favorite superhero?
Ooh, Gambit from X-Men, hands down,
Ooh,
hands down. Little.
that's interesting. I was thinking that you were gonna pick Captain America,
So it's
but
funny. I would actually. So the Punisher would probably be my second choice. And the only
ah,
reason the Punisher is because when I grew up, like I actually in foster care, there was a guy who kind of mentored me while I was in the housing system. So I was really young and I wasn't
mhm,
supposed to be in the house with all these older kids. But the
yeah.
foster care system was really different in the 80s than it is now. So they had kind of nowhere to put me. So that's what they did. And and so yeah, not near as many controls, right? We got to wear seatbelts and
Mm,
stuff. It's a totally different time.
yeah.
But he was totally into the Punisher, and he gave me like a Punisher hat, and he would always like sneak me the comics so I could read them, right? Because they're like super bad. Like you should not be
No
giving these to
way.
any kid below the age of like 18, right? Like these are super bad. And so like I'm like 8 years old, like reading these comics with a flashlight. So that one would be another cool one. But yeah, man, the Gambit's always resonated with me. I don't know, like the
You
kind
know,
of
I
attitude.
I grew up in an era where I didn't learn about Gambit enough. Like I didn't grow up in the States. So
Man,
I
you're
didn't know
missing.
Gambit's powers.
You're missing,
I
man.
mean,
He's
I might have to go back and watch all the X-Men comics,
Yeah, I was so
the
psyched for like a movie about him or something because there was like
Mhm.
rumors flying around about it and it never happened. But
They've been flying those rumors for at least a decade, man.
man,
Easily a decade.
if it happens, if they need somebody to play Gambit, I will dye my hair. Like I volunteer. Like you're
Let's
listening, all right?
go.
Like I'm ready.
Roman is here. Awesome, man. I love it. Last question. If you were a board game, what would it be?
Two come to mind. I would either be Risk or Monopoly. And if there was a
Hmm.
game that mixed war and capitalism together, that would probably be like the perfect board game for me. But
War and Capitalism. I think that's a new board
that
game.
is, we should
You need
totally
to
create it right now, right?
create.
But yes, like that is Monopoly because me and my wife, we played it when we first got married. And I got super competitive and we had all our friends over and everything. And she was like, loan me some money. And I was like, you don't have any money. Like, you can't have any. Like, no, like, you can't pay me back. And she's like, I'm your wife. And I'm like, not Monopoly, right? So, like, it gets super heated. And Risk, I've just played that game so many times, just leaving the board run. Like, I love those games that you play for like a long time. You gotta leave the board up. Like, you're constantly having to think through future state
Mhm.
actions, right? So yeah, I would say Monopoly and Risk are tied.
Dude, you're giving me an idea. So I'm looking at, in my mind, I'm a bunch of stuff's going on because I've played Catan, right? It's
Yeah,
got
I like
some,
Catan.
it's kind of like, it's got a little bit of Monopoly. There's no money, but there's like a resources. But dude, with risk, you can attack. So what if you have Monopoly, and if you're at a hotel and you don't have the money, you can just shoot them down.
There you go, right? See,
Right.
like we should totally like call it
Something
like,
like-
Compton or something and just like get wild with it, right? Like
or
definitely.
a combination of John Wick. You go to the hotel and you're safe.
Yes. Like everything else is up for grabs, but this one place is safe. Yes. Like I just think like it'd be kind of, it'd be kind of a mindless fun in a new way. Like capitalism is something we're always trying to teach, right? Because we want people to understand entrepreneurship. And I think Monopoly and life are kind of like the capitalism games, but truthfully, like I just don't think they're accurate representations of what it
they're
is,
not.
right? And for kids, I get it. It's like a learning step, right? But yeah, I think inside of capitalism there is a little bit of war and conflict, right? Like it to be more true to real world had some form of a currency system, and like if you took over Austria, you got Austria's money or resources, and that kind of like boosted yours, right? Because you could either win by, it's kind of like civilization, right? You can either win by getting the most money, or you can win by just decimating everybody from the map.
Exactly. And here's my daughter. I'm muted, I guess. Not muted anymore. Yeah, so dude, that was a ton of fun. Thank you so much for your time.
My
I
pleasure.
love your answers. One sec, hold on. Be quiet.
I feel you. That's me, man. It happens. It actually happened to me last weekend. Or I was on the Industry Explorers podcast. My son's like, because my office door is like right there around the corner.
That's right.
He's like, So, I feel you, man.
That's so fun. Yeah, I was on Industry Explorers and my daughter came and hung out with me.
See,
I'm like, all right, this is
I
cool.
was gonna let him hang out with me, but he would get right here and be like, so
I know what you mean. Now she's playing with Bumblebee right now.
There you go.
All right, man. Thank you so much. Last question of all, where can my audience find you?
Yeah, so if you want to know more about consulting and things like that, you can find me at bluesphinxconsulting.com. I try to help businesses improve the way they communicate and give them success through communication. For my podcast, look up Real Talk with Roman, Facebook, Instagram, anywhere else you can find me, Roman Roberts, LinkedIn, all of that. And man, I definitely, the 10-minute episodes, they're short, they're super easy to digest, so highly recommend checking them out. We talk to athletes, authors, actors, like we've talked to everybody, and veterans, people who have gone through sexual trauma, just all these different people to try to give everyone tips to live a better life. And it's been great so far. So
fantastic, man. Thank you so much again, and have a great one. Talk to you soon.
You too, man. Thank you.
Congratulations, you made it to the end of the episode. Thanks so much for listening to our guest on this episode. Please send me an email at junaid@hacksandhobbies.com to tell me what you loved about our guest today. You could find links mentioned in this episode on the hacksandhobbies.com website.